Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third episode of the Green Shift podcast. Today, we are going to learn about amazing topic. It's all about energy system with our guest Emmanuel Azam. Emmanuel is energy analyst, and he is a MSc holder from Oxford University, um, having an MSc on energy system with distinction. So, congratulations, Emmanuel, for
Much.
graduation, and we are very happy to have you here. Currently, Emmanuel, he is working at Mitsubishi as an energy analyst. So I cannot tell you all about Emmanuel. So just please tell us about yourself, your journey, your project, and your background. The
All
stage
right.
is yours.
Thank you so much, Salma. And it's a very huge pleasure being here on your podcast. I feel very special that I could actually be one of your guests. So thank you. Like you made mention, my name is Emmanuel. Very much passionate about the energy space, especially when it comes to global transition and how to even like trickle it down to low income economies. Personally, I am a Nigerian, so I started my life in Nigeria as a young boy who was very much interested to see how can I be able to understand a problem and find ways to solve it. And that probably would delve into my whole instead around going into engineering because I feel engineers are like problem solvers. And so I studied electrical engineering at the Federal University of Technology, Owerri. I graduated with first class, and I was like, oh, I think maybe it's good time I try to get like industry experience, understand how a business is doing it, how do we see things tailor within the energy space when it comes to automation and a bit around a digitization. And so I decided to have a stint in that space. I worked with an automations company for over 2 years and then decided to go pursue another studies around digitization and understanding how data analytics can play a huge role for startup businesses as well as already huge multinational incorporations that are actually doing huge goals in Africa. So I did that postgraduate diploma in Nigeria as well. And I think that should be like the huge leap for me where I was able to understand, okay, this is where we are as a country, Nigeria, this is where we are as a continent, Africa, and what role we can actually play in saying that we can transform ourselves from just being a huge holder of these energy resources to being people who can utilize it for our own development and growth. And for me, my personal ethos was more like to change the narrative where I don't want to be in this circle where people are talking that Africa has lots of resources, but we don't know how to utilize this. Rather, I wanted to change the narrative where Africa has been able to develop itself to this very huge extent because of the amazing resources we have. That was the whole motivation for me. And so it's been that way. I started to go back into the renewable energy space, worked with an electric vehicle providing company in Africa where we focused on commercial and industrial partners and was able to make good traction in that space. And then finally, Oxford came calling, and here I am, graduated from Oxford. It had been a wonderful experience. I'm so grateful that I could actually be able to sit with some of the wonderful minds in my class, people in the university, get to talk more around how global transition is coming to play. And then, just like we mentioned, energy systems as a whole, what does it really entail? So, I don't know if it's safe to go into talking more about the masters, but yeah, I think that's just more of it over the course of discussion. Yeah, I'll share more about it. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that's really great, and I think it's going to be an amazing conversation. So,
Thank
what
you.
is energy system? This word is like it looked very promising, and how it's related to energy transition, and that hopes around the new era of mineral and energy transition that Africa, waiting for to utilize this era very well. So, tell
Mm-hmm.
us what is energy system and why it's important to understand.
Okay, so I think this is a very vital point where we need to understand the fact that transition cannot happen if we don't see it from a system perspective, where we understand what has actually existed prior to now and what are the strategic steps we're trying to see that things actually are put into place to see a sustainability transition happen within that sector. And so that's why I was very much thrilled about the energy systems program in Oxford because it wasn't just having a minute focus around renewable energy. That was the future. That is the future for sustainability in the long run. But at the same time, I was also picking on understanding how has it been over time? What has been the historical trend? Why have we decided to delve into the current energy scenario we have now? And then how can we take ourselves out of this in more prolific ways that everyone is part and parcel of it? So the whole idea is looking at it from the generation end of it. How do we generate the energy in the first place? While we're generating the energy, there's the other side of the balance, which is the demand. How are we able to ascertain what the energy demand is to be able to show that the generation we're providing actually meets the demand that we have and also can be able to achieve some sense of energy security where we don't have to wake up tomorrow and we all have a blackout on the global level. So energy system just looks around a holistic understanding of how energy plays a significant role in our daily lives, such that we're able to meet our demands as seamlessly as possible, at the same time making sure that it is safe and also affordable. And most importantly, looking into the fact that while we transition, we don't just tell businesses to ultimately shut down, but look for how can businesses be able to identify their key values, their key missions, and how they can sustainably and more effectively like find ways to become greener and safer even for the environment. So yeah, that's just what it's all about. And I can see large businesses, I can see economies making such strategic steps. You can see the COP28 coming in and how discussions are coming in around that space to understand, yes, we are not going to be having a very minute and one-faceted way of seeing things. We want to see the multidimensional way of understanding what the problem is and how to solve it. And all of this has to come with understanding the part of design thinking and how you can tailor it to the energy space and how every stakeholder can put their hands on deck to see that we have a world that it's very much safe for everyone. Yeah.
Okay. So, always that you've mentioned that COP 28 is coming, and
Yeah.
we've already discussing the idea like it's a collective effort that need to be done by everyone, but
Yeah.
definitely there is like a major player, and the energy system differ from country to country. So I just want you to highlight like how is the energy system in the least developing countries, considering the fact that maybe most of the countries they are not, thinking, as you mentioned, designing system, or they are not thinking in a systemic manner. So just highlight, or describe the energy system in the least developing countries and how it's so far from what need to be done and how it should look like.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a very wonderful question, owing to the fact that these economies we're talking about have so much prospects when it comes to catching up with what is trending or what is actually the next phase for sustainability on the global space. Now we have developed economies which are really setting the pace. We can see economies who are deciding to go 100% full on renewable energy. We can see the UK standing out. We can see other countries in the European space doing the same trajectory. But then when we look on the other side of the continent where we find low income economies trying to leapfrog to get to this point, it creates the question of would there ever be a time where we can actually catch up? Now, I'm going to give a case study of Africa. I'm going to generalize Africa as a whole, just so we can see how this comes into play. The total energy demand in Africa, interestingly, it's 700 terawatt hour as of 2020. This was data being produced by the IEA. And now 700 terawatt hour is just the demand for Africa, 70% coming from South Africa. And I was like, okay, let me go and see how it's been done in the UK. And well, let's see the demand in the UK. The UK's energy demand is actually over 357 terawatt hour as of 2021. Now, this is a population of less than 73 million people compared to an entire continent. And you can see how their energy requirement is more than half of what we actually require in Africa. It shows like the huge gap where we need to be able to see how we're able to meet our demands. While this demand doesn't really tell us precisely what is at stake in these countries, it shows us like there is like a huge opportunity where we need to understand how does everybody come into the table in ensuring that they have access to energy. We don't want to hear a case where it's just 700. It's more than that. There's a huge room for progress. But at the same time, while we have this huge and increasing demand, which of course we believe that Africa will be one of the most populated continents by 2050, having the highest number of youths, it shows that there's going to be a huge requirement of energy to be able to accommodate this entirely huge growth and innovation coming into the continent. But while we have this demand, how does generation come into play? And so I look at it and like one way Africa can actually be able to see that it can meet up with such kind of global scale of movement is to understand what exactly is unique to us as a continent. Now, for me, I feel like I made mention, the narrative is to understand that we don't need to go by that same quote of we have so much resources, but we can't utilize it, but rather we are able to develop ourselves because we utilize the resources we had adequately. And to do this, I think there are three people who are involved in this. The first is the government. Now, the government has a huge role to play when it comes to fostering an environment that promotes such kind of huge transitioning, or at least ensuring that people are part and parcel of this movement. While you have the government there, we also need businesses who are actually there to see that we can actually push this agenda to a huge turnaround. And now, when you have those businesses can't function if you don't have the markets, if you don't have the customers, if you don't have the people that actually believe in this. So these three set of stakeholders are very much important to say that Africa can be able to tailor itself. Can we find a situation where governments in Africa can decide to say, rather than us having this whole issue around energy security, having this issue around oil dependency, we can look inwardly and see what is actually unique with respect to our natural resources. If we feel we can look at the opportunity of exploring the solar energy, why don't we create a solar farm that can actually meet our demands? Understand where best to situate these farms, ensure that this would be our power generation grid with respect to what we want to do. If there's a need for us to have interconnected grids between countries, can we sit down on a round table and say, okay, this is how we want to go about it. This is how we can create a free trade zone whereby we can be able to have free transfer of energy and meet our natural demands based on what we need. While they are actually making this kind of policies to say that they are being put in place, they also have to work policies that welcome businesses to happily invest. It's interesting to see how much investment is coming in from the GIZ, from the United Nations, through the Sustainable Development or Sustainable Energy for All. And seeing this kind of huge metrics coming into Africa, I feel like there's a lot more that can be done. There are really interesting energy institutions, people who have actually enjoyed so much from the oil and gas that are willing to transition to energy? And can these companies be encouraged to come and say, okay, yes, we want to be able to do something that can actually give back to the society or perhaps give back to Africa? Or not necessarily even give back, something that can actually bolster our economy on the long run. The only way this can happen is if we have the right policies that is there to welcome them, and we also have the right environment. Now, business, government, that has been taken care of. We also need to ensure that this energy we're providing is actually affordable for the markets that we are giving. So you need to make sure that your consumers have the right equipment or the right demands that they need to meet whatever they need. If we're talking about people who daily needing this to meet their everyday lifestyles, please understand how much energy per kilo or per capita do I need to provide for each person for in Africa or in each for each person in a country, and see that you're able to situate it. It's so will I say deploring to say that Africa's per capita energy requirement is very low compared to other economies. Is there a way we can actually bolster it? And to do this requires us understanding what are the needs for energy. Do we necessarily need to have a huge flat screen TV laying around in every rooms, or we necessarily can be able to see how we can reduce our energy demand such that everybody can adequately have the right energy requirements they need? Can we see avenues where people can be able to come up with business ideas where they can be able to tailor in such energy that's being provided for their business to create sustainable economy for their local environment, so that you don't have to have a farmer bothering about how does he protect his crops when he doesn't have electricity to be able to like refrigerate or make sure that those products are being cooled rather than it getting spoiled. These are very market driven incentives that should make people see the reason why they need this energy and why they are willing to pay the amount they want to pay for it. And so also making it affordable for them to do it. So I feel these economies have these very three frontiers to look into. Governments playing their part to see that policies are put in place. While the governments are doing that, businesses also seeing a reason to why they would want to invest and why they're investing, looking for very much market creative insight on how to go about it. We might necessarily not have to need some particular ways or solutions, but there are some that are actually unique to us. When it comes to e-mobility transitioning, I'll use us as a case study, which is my research. I understand that EV adoption has become the new end goal for most economies, especially within the developed world. But having an electric vehicle in Africa might be very far fetched because they are very expensive. You can't tell a normal man who is trying to find his way of living or trying to find what to put on the table for his family to say he should bring out over £30,000 to buy a car. £30,000 should be over 30 million, maybe naira in Nigerian equivalent. And you tell him, bring out this money to come and buy an EV. It's more sustainable for you. He'll be like, that's not my problem. The main problem is how to do I meet such my daily demands at the cheapest way possible to be able to bring food for my family. And you notice that one thing that has actually revolved around our economy in West Africa or perhaps East Africa and even Africa as a whole is the motorcycle business, where people are more or less tuned into using two wheelers for their daily businesses or their daily lives. We can see end to end delivery coming into play as at, let me say, last year. I know Nigeria has over 200 motorcycles in the country. Same also applies to Kenya. Kenya has over 150 motorcycles that are currently operating. These are businesses that are thriving. Can we find a way that rather than using these motorcycles that depend on fossil fuel and find a way to transition them to electric motorcycles where we know that this is affordable for people to use? While we're also trying to do that, can we make it affordable for them in a way that the cost part of the bikes or the motorcycles are actually the batteries? Is there a way we can elevate that cost from them and say, rather than you owning a motorcycle with a battery, you can just buy the motorcycle, but all you need to do is just get a battery, swap it for another charge battery. So all you just have to do is just go to a battery swapping station, get a new battery, put it in your battery, pay for like maybe pay 1,000 naira or $2, so whichever the case might be for every swap that you have. Thereby, you've elevated that cost from the person, and the person only focuses about my motorcycle rather than thinking about how do I charge the battery, how do I ensure my battery is safe, how do I focus on insurance and all of this. This eliminates all this problem. End of the day, you have electric bike motorcycles, which are equivalent to the diesel-driven motorcycles. End of the day, you're also going to increase the economy because the government will be able to benefit from the taxes that come through this adoption of EVs, and everybody still meets that sustainability target of ensuring that by 2050, the economy is able to meet a net zero, a carbon-free economy, a carbon-free society. So it's a win-win for everybody. Government benefits because they welcomed the whole idea of e-mobility in their countries. Businesses invest because they start to sell these electric motorcycles within the continent or within these countries at a very affordable rates. There's also the battery swapping business where somebody can decide to say, oh, I'm going to do battery as a service and be able to help people get batteries that they need without necessarily going through the hustle of trying to pay for electricity and thinking about safety of their lives and batteries. All this is taken care of by business. And then you have the market where people are willing to get this motorcycle because they know it helps them reduce their daily costs. They're able to do whatever they want to do. And at the same time, they're also able to generate money and revenue. So everybody wins. The economy is bolstered. Sustainability targets are reached. And when we come to the next COP29, we can say, yes, Africa or most least developing economies are actually meeting up to their targets. So I think that would just be my key thought process around this. And this is not just around the e-mobility. There are other sectors. We can see solar power coming into play. We can see tidal coming. We can see geothermal opportunities in Kenya. Is how best to strategically utilize these resources for the development of these countries. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you've covered different aspects, and I think that's what's energy system, look like. So you have to think in a very systemic way, bringing all aspects together: sustainability, economy, and affordability as well. So, but and this is a huge responsibility for you. I think this cannot be done by by that old manager or old person. So this is a research area by area and case by case in Africa. Youth like you, me, they should work on this, and this is what needs to be done so we can achieve net zero target as well as living that in just developed manner and having the issue and overcoming the issue of like that less demand of energy in Africa. So I
Sure.
guess that's really wonderful. I
Thank you.
was because yeah, I've really like find it like this is a key. Let me see points to be considered, so we can drive some research around this area by area and case by case. I
Hmm.
just because I wanted to my audience. I expect to be like diverse, so I
Hmm.
just want you to tell like that how this approach is multidisciplinary, finance, sustainability, and different people from different background, policy, as you've mentioned, and those who are coming from oil and gas industry also they need to contribute to this. So, final message on this point for African youth in particular.
Yeah, I think the energy space is a very large space where we need a multi diversity of players who can come in to see us make so much impact in the fastest way possible. And in doing so, I think it's a ball game where we need amazing insights. We need the right set of people who would actually champion the goals that are needed to do this. We need the right expertise. And I think this doesn't just all rely on the engineer or whoever technical expertise. There's also the non-technical expertise where we need people who are making that managerial decision, those who are within the policy and understanding how does energy come into play. I think one thing I always tell myself is we need to create a or we need to bridge a gap between academia, industry, as well as policy. It's a very important part that we need to play, especially for we Africans. It's one thing to have research being done and it's just sitting there in journal websites and people just go there to download. But is there a way we can actually tailor this research to real time impact, real world impact, real time solutions, things that would actually change the narrative, that we actually see a lot of impact being made in this country? So is there a way we can see that industries are part of this? Is there a way we can make that lawmaker understand what energy implies? Can you speak or can we start speaking the languages of government? Government would probably not understand me when I say 700 megawatts or terawatt hours. It means probably like, what does that actually mean? Does it mean that we'll have electricity for 1 year, 2 years without interruption? Perhaps maybe the language they understand is the money language. And then I can tell them how that energy is equivalent to the money they're going to make based on some kind of financial metrics. So if you're going to be able to transition this way, you're going to be able to welcome such kind of energy or renewable sources. This is what it's going to mean for the government. The government is going to benefit in this way through taxation. This is how it's going to elevate some spendings around GHG emissions and the like. So rather than just spending to um, pay for carbon taxes for GHG, this is how it's going to help the government. This is how government doesn't really have to worry so much about investment because there are people who are key players are ready to bring in this investment into the country. When you speak their language and let them understand the impact it's going to make, I'm sure they'll be able to tie into this vision and want to support. We need people like lawyers who are able to give us all this commercial and legal advice on how best to go about it. If you need to have like PPA signings between industries where you're like, oh, you're going to be a power provider to some specific sectors in the country, is it around steel manufacturing? We need all these tenders being put into place and everybody's hand needs to be on deck. You need the geologists, you need those within the oil space to understand, okay, how does carbon capture come into the space where we're talking about, oh, we're emitting a lot of carbon and all of this, although Africa does not emit, I think the last time I checked, we emit an average of 3% of the total GHG emissions or carbon emissions in the world. So it might not really match up to what other economies are doing, but that does not give us an excuse not to also see how we can best see a carbon zero society or environment within the continent. So rooms for carbon capture systems. Is there where we can have geologists who can tell us, okay, maybe this is how best we can capture the carbon and put it back into all these wells that we've actually explored and find safe ways of actually like harnessing the energy. Do we need to look into natural liquefied gas and all of this? These are very much huge avenues that we need to find sustainable ways to go about it. We cannot afford to miss out in this opportunity. And so we need to understand what's the best way for us. How do we get our talents? We are the young ones, same, just the same way you and I are trying to preach sustainability, preach energy on a different level, try to make people understand the beauty around this whole green society. I feel everybody should be part and parcel of it. Every young mind who is carrying out a research, everyone working in that top energy company or even that small energy business, you can still make so much impact. And let us see how we can do that. And hopefully, I'm sure by the next time we'll be having another roundtable discussion. We're talking about how our countries are progressing or making so much strides in ensuring that the world becomes a better place, especially for the African continent and other low income developing economies. In fact, I'm tired of mentioning low income economies. I want to really get to a point where I'm like, we're talking about global economies and we are seeing all these countries falling into that sphere where everyone is a leading champion in different facets of the energy space. So yeah, that will be
Yeah.
my points.
I think that's this is a great message that next
Yeah.
time, like, we would love to see that gap between, government and academia is getting less, and
Mhm.
more research is getting developed, and definitely, despite the fact that Africa is least contribute least to the greenhouse gas emission, but that's not a reason that we should like go slower. Definitely, we
True.
should go fast, and we should contribute to having a net zero in a global level. And
Yeah.
we have a chance and we have opportunity, so we don't need to burn more, oil, since we can estimate, as you mentioned, like solar power and wind and all these things that can cover our needs. So I
Yeah.
think that, decarbonization. I wanted to tell you, like, what is how decarbonization and how it linked to this. Like, is decarbonization part of energy system or decarbonizing the energy system? This word, how it linked to all these keywords. Let me say,
Yeah, I think it's a very huge part of the whole talk around the energy, the future for energy. So decarbonization is something that one I hold dear to my heart, and I believe a lot of people are also considering it too. We want to see a future where we don't have to live under that whole science-based part of the energy or global warming coming to less than 2 or more than 2 degrees and in the next few years. So decarbonization is like the strategic steps in trying to see how we can do it. And it doesn't just have to focus just solely on the energy companies per se, even though most of them are like the huge emitters. But even you and I, we are actually carbon emitters in our own different ways. Are there ways we can actually find opportunities to reduce our carbon footprint? Businesses at the same time, how are they able to see that they can be able to reduce their scope 1, scope 2, and even scope 3 emissions? Some businesses might say, oh yes, we've been able to achieve a considerable impact when it comes to reducing our own emissions, which is the scope 1 emissions. But most of them, their scope 3 emissions are the major facets of these carbonization emission that we're talking around. So can businesses actually look forward to seeing how they can reduce it? I was talking about you and I. From our own perspective, how can we be able to minimize our demands? These are like really interesting things that people really put aside. We forget that, oh, even we ourselves as individuals have our role to play when it comes to decarbonization. We don't have to leave it for the big players. The big players, whilst we are holding them accountable, they on their own end are also ensuring that they're doing their best to see how they can decarbonize or reduce their carbon footprint. Well, even we as individuals, with the billions of people living, imagine if we decide to try to reduce our demand. Do we need to drive that car for that 10 minutes walk that we could just do? Do we need to have the water run for so long? Do we need to have to cook for that long? Is there a way we can probably save our energy, turn off the light bulbs? All of these are different ways at which we can minimize our carbon footprint and see that everybody transitions on an equal level in a way that the world becomes safer and yeah, decarbonization becomes a reality in that space. So I wish everybody can track yeah the rate at which they decarbonize. And that will bring me to maybe the last thing I will say, which has to do with the fact that you can't change what you can't measure. So, based on the fact that we're trying to say, oh, we're decarbonizing, and everybody's bringing up different numbers, but the truth is, there's a role that digitization has to play when it comes to this. If we want to be sure that, yes, we are really decarbonizing, like we say, there's a part of where we need to track what we are doing. And I think digitization is a huge game changer when it comes to that. Can we be able to utilize these technologies, AI, machine learning, try to see how smart metering and all of this can be able to help us understand what is our energy usage and how best we can reduce it. This would be a huge turnaround for businesses. This would be a huge turnaround for countries. This would be a huge turnaround for even individuals just like you and me. So if we need to make changes, we also need to find a way to track what changes